Hi, good morning. My name is Wendy Flynn, and I'm going to give you a quick introduction of aquatic invasive species here in Connecticut and our boat launch monitoring program. So the goal of the Aquatic Invasive Species Launch Monitoring Program is for volunteers to go to our state boat launches or local launches as well, and to interact with boaters and talk to them about ways that they can keep our waters clean, specifically about preventing the spread of aquatic invasive species. We do have a lot of resources here in Connecticut that make it a great place to, go boating and fishing and swimming. So we want to try to keep it as usable as possible. So in this short training, I'm going to go through how invasive species got here, some of the species that we have in Connecticut, and then preventive ways that DEEP and other agencies are trying to utilize in order to keep them out of our waters. Many people are familiar with aquatic invasive species and the problems that they cause, but I want to give a little bit of an introduction just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Plants are considered invasive because in their native environment, predators, parasites, pathogens, and competitors keep these species in check and create a balance in the water body. But in a new environment, these checks and balances just aren't there. The invasive species can outcompete native species because they're aggressive, reproduce quickly, and mature earlier in our season. So some of these examples of how invasive species might interfere with boating, let's say, is if you're driving on the lake and all of a sudden your propeller gets fouled with all these plants. That's one way. If you're fishing, you cast out into where you think you're going to get some great fish and all you end up with weeds on your hook and you lose your bait, right? That's always frustrating. And then if somebody is using the lake to swim through, then if they get caught up in their foot or tangled up in it, it could be, a safety concern if somebody's not there to help, to get them out of to the weeds. So this could be a great question of how did invasive species get here into the United States? Let's think bigger than just Connecticut. So invasive species can be introduced in a variety of ways, such as a ballast, like the ballast water in a large cargo ship. If you've been paying attention to the news recently, there was a cargo ship that actually unfortunately hit a bridge in Maryland. So those ships, they'll take water on. They used to take water on in the port that they were in to balance their load, and then they would go to the next port. When they offloaded some of their cargo, they would release some of the water at that port, and that ballast water could hold some organisms that were native to, let's use Maryland, right, the United States. If it goes over to, I think this vessel was actually going to Sri Lanka. So if it brought the water from Maryland and deposited it in Sri Lankan water, there's organisms in there. There's actually a way now that cargo ships like this, when they're in the middle of the ocean, whatever large ocean that they're in, they have to transfer out the water there. So they have to let out the water and take in new water because usually there's less stuff that could potentially grow in the new port. Some other ways are sport fish stocking. We do DEEP does stock bass fish and some other fish, trout and stuff like that. So we do that because it is a sport. Sometimes there's accidental releases with bait or aquaculture, aquarium trade. If somebody dumps their fish aquarium from their home and it has live plants in that, something like that, can start a new population of the plant or the animal. There's some places down in I think in the Carolinas, they have population of goldfish, like the normal goldfish you'd see at their pet store. They're growing because they're invasive. They're considered invasive, even though we have them in our house sometimes. But the common theme is that all of these are primarily moved through humans. So we just talked a little bit about how invasive species got into the United States. Let's talk about how they move across the nation and across our Connecticut water bodies. So again, like I said, human activity is actually one of the biggest vectors on how invasive species spread. So they can attach to a vessel or equipment, scuba gear, fishing equipment, hunting gear, anything that you have on the boat. And they hitchhike, right? So they attach kind of like the top photo, or both photos actually, the weeds just attach to it. And if they're not removed, they can be spread to the next water body. So I have a list of recreational gear that can transport some of the invasive plants. There's also commercial activity that can do it. If there's a weed harvester on the lake and it's not cleaned and disinfected properly, and it goes from one water body to the next, it could transfer some of the plant fragments, which in a couple of slides we'll learn about how most of our plants do spread through fragmentation. But, there's also, I mentioned aquarium trade as well. People don't want their aquariums anymore. That's a human activity. They physically go and dump it into the water body because they think, it can live. And then there's also natural dispersion. Sometimes it isn't human activity. Sometimes it's a bird lands in one lake, starts eating some vegetation, gets it caught on its foot, flies over another water body, and shakes it off because it's a nuisance to them when they're flying. And it could, has the potential, if it's not dry, which it probably wouldn't be if they were eating it, then it can cause a new population of that plant in that water body. So the next few slides will give you some general information about some of the aquatic invasive plants and animals that we have here in Connecticut. Through the Launch Monitor program, you won't need to identify them, just know a few characteristics about them, particularly about how they spread. So first up is Eurasian Watermilfoil. Eurasian milfoil is an aquatic perennial plant. And as you can see from the photos, it has a feathery type leaves that are whirled around the stem. So that just means that they're in a kind of a circle around it. They're not opposite, which you will see in a few minutes with a different plant. But what these plants do, what the Eurasian milfoil does, is that it can form a large mat just underneath the water surface. And sometimes there are some flower spikes that will emerge from the water that you can see in the picture kind of in the center of the slide. This allows the milfoil to crowd out native plants and interfere with recreation. Driving a boat gets all over your propeller, swimming through the lake in this area. So this plant, as do many of our the invasive plants here in Connecticut, they spread through fragmentation. And fragmentation means that a small piece of the plant can be broken off, and it has the ability to drift to another section of the lake and can form another population of the plant. The ways that boaters can unfortunately cause this to happen is if they drive through an area of milfoil and they chop it up with their propeller. So some of the ways that lake associations try to control milfoil and other invasive species are very expensive, and eradication is virtually impossible, as with the rest of the slides. You're going to hear me keep saying that, where control is expensive and eradication is almost impossible. So up next is variable leaf watermilfoil. This is similar to the Eurasian watermilfoil. As the name states, it just has a variable or more than one type of leaf on the plant stalk. Variable leaf watermilfoil has feathery leaves in the bottoms, just like the Eurasian milfoil, and it has like singular blade leaves towards the top of the plant. You can see that a little bit better in the drawing. It shows the two types. Similar to Eurasian milfoil, this variable leaf watermilfoil spreads through fragmentation, can form dense mats just under the water surface and crowd out native plants, and it interferes with recreation. Again, control is expensive, so there's a slide on some control options after we get through some of these plants, but some of the control options are very expensive, and once any invasive plants, particularly this variable leaf watermilfoil, once it's introduced to a lake or a water body, eradication is virtually impossible. Next is a plant called curly pondweed. A distinguishing characteristic is that the alternating leaves look like a lasagna noodle. They're flat in the middle and have waves on the outside. So this plant, well, it does spread through fragmentation. Its primary way of reproducing, of growing the plant, is through a turion, and that's on the bottom, the photo on the bottom, and it's a modified leaf bud on the shoot or stem. So turions will break during dormancy, kind of typically during the fall. They survive through the winter and they grow rapidly through the spring. curly pondweed typically dies back during the midsummer. So a great way to think about this plant, and actually, this plant, yeah, and some of the other ones too, but this one, because it forms that turion, the condensed leaf bud, it's kind of like if you've ever seen or had mint in your garden. It grows through rhizomes under the ground, and then sometimes you'll see it, sometimes it'll lay on the surface, and it does have some condensed leaf buds. They're not quite the same, they look a bit different. But if you think about that, if you've ever had a mint or a vining plant on the upland, that's kind of how this one grows. The curly pondweed does grow entirely as a submerged aquatic plant with no floating leaves, so it forms a dense mat just under the water surface, and it can crowd out native plants and interfere with recreation, just like the milfoils that we just learned about. This next plant is called Fanwort, and it was first found in Connecticut in 1932. As you can see from the photo, it looks similar to the Eurasian and variable leaf watermilfoils. Fanwort is like variable leaf milfoil in that it has two types of leaves. The drawing shows the feathery leaves in the bottom of the plant, and then it has pond lily-like leaves that float on the surface of the water. These leaves in Fanwort are not as big as pond lilies. I mean, they're very tiny. They're about that big. I don't know if you can see that, but they're very small. So the comparison is just how they float on the surface, not the size. The one difference between the fanwort and the milfoils is that the leaves are opposite each other. They are not whirled around, and you can see that a little bit better in the drawing. So you can see how the leaves are opposite on the stem. But similar to the milfoils, it does spread primarily through fragmentation, and it can form dense mats just under the water surface, which crowd out native plants and interfere with recreation. And once this plant is in a water body, it's very expensive for control, and eradication is nearly impossible. So up next is a plant called water chestnut. And like the other plants discussed, the water chestnut has the potential to crowd out native plants, interfere with recreation, and just look aesthetically unpleasing. The water chestnut is a rooted aquatic plant with submerged floating leaves. As you can see from the photos, they have a glossy green floating leaves that are triangular with toothed edging, and they form rosettes around a stem that can go to the substrate. Now, the plant root can be 15 feet in the water, 10 to 15 feet down in the water. That's how far the rosettes will grow up. Water chestnut will grow small white flowers, which unfortunately you can't see in the photos, that sprout in the center of the rosette. And from that flower, it will produce a seed, which has 4 sharp spikes and can be very painful if it's stepped on. You can see them on the photo in the kind of more towards the center. That's a green seed, and on the photos kind of on the bottom, they're brown. So those have been dried. They actually, yeah, they were actually collected and donated to me so I can show them when I do this training in person. So water chestnut is different from the previous plants in that it is an annual plant, and it needs a seed to produce a plant each time. So these plants don't spread through fragmentation. They need a seed in order to populate another plant. These plants, because they are annual plants, the good thing that comes through control is that eradication is possible when they are hand pulled. So if there's no seed source, then they can't grow. So there's lots and lots of efforts during the spring and summer, I guess maybe more summer, late spring in the summer, to hand pull these. So if this interests you and you are looking to get into, try hand pulling some of the water chestnuts, please reach out. So next up is a plant called Hydrilla. And Hydrilla is similar to the other plants in where that control is expensive. It forms a large dense mat right under the water surface. So this plant has between 5 and 8 leaves whirled around the stem. The leaves have like serrated like teeth on the edge of the leaf, and they have the ability to grow, the stems have the ability to grow up to 9 meters, which is about 29 feet in length. So in the last couple of years, the last few years, Connecticut has seen an increase of hydrilla in our waters. So in the Connecticut River, it kind of exponentially, and it can be seen from the Massachusetts border down to Essex. And Essex is where the water starts getting a little bit more brackish. So the hydrilla doesn't really like salt water. It prefers fresh water. So I have another slide dedicated to hydrilla, just to kind of show you guys a little bit more of some of the work that we're doing and unfortunately how fast that this plant is growing. So in 2023 alone, hydrilla has appeared in the lakes listed on the slide. Prior to that, it had only been found in Coventry Lake in Coventry and the Connecticut River in, well, in a couple of places. It has grown a little bit more in 2023. So because the river is unique, it's not a closed system like a lake or a pond. The Connecticut River has tides, current, and it creates its own cove, or there's other coves, and just lots and lots of dynamic in the Connecticut River. So the Army Corps of Engineers actually came out and studied last year on how we can potentially treat the hydrilla in the river. So they put in, I'm not sure if you heard, but there's some information on the slide. Definitely check out the Army Corps of Engineers website, and they have details on the dye that they put in to try to get, to study the currents and the tides and the flow of the Connecticut River to see how we can potentially add some herbicides to potentially, try to get the growth down a little bit. It is a very fast growing and highly invasive plant, and we are all working very hard on ways to prevent the spread and try some new control methods. This next slide just gives a little bit of a side-by-side comparison of the plants that we just ran through. We're going to switch gears to an algae that sort of mimics a plant, and it's called Didymo. Sometimes it is also referred to as Rock-Snot. So you can see in the picture that has the hand, it kind of resembles a little bit of boogers, but it does not feel that way. It actually has a woolly consistency, so the look is quite different. But this is an algae that likes cool, freshwater streams. It can grow easily over the bottom of rocks, crowding out native species. And it was found in the Farmington River in April of 2011. We also have a few invasive animals in Connecticut. The photo on the left shows an Asian clam above a penny and zebra mussels below it. The photo on the right was a photo taken of zebra mussels that are currently in Lake Lilanona. Zebra mussels have been in the Twin Lakes in Salisbury since 1998. However, in 2010 and 2011, they were found in the Housatonic River impounds. So we're going to go briefly through a couple more slides to learn a little bit more about the invasive zebra mussels. A zebra mussel is a freshwater bivalve that was originally introduced into the United States in the 1980s, most likely from a large cargo ship coming into a U.S. port. They are very hardy, prolific mussels that can clog water intakes, encrust piers, docks, boats, and damage native mussel populations. Because they are filter feeders, they strain plankton from the waters, from the lakes and the ponds. When they do this, they can clarify the water, which seems like a good thing, but it reduces food for young fish. And with greater water clarity, the sunlight reaches deeper, which will allow invasive or non-native plants to grow faster and into deeper waters. And that could also lead to an algal bloom. A typical spawning season is from May to September, which happens to be our boating season. And that means that boaters need to be diligent in checking their boats and their equipment to help prevent the spread of zebra mussels. Zebra mussels are very tolerant if their environmental conditions are met. Calcium is one of the best indicators to see if a mussel can withstand growing in that water body. On the slide, there's also a list of the conditions that they want to be perfect, but I do want to touch on the water velocity. So We know that mussels, once they form their adult shell, they become sedentary, right? So you can see on the photo in this, those strings that are hanging from the mussels, that's how they attach to their substrate. So, and once they're attached there, they need the water to flow to them, so that brings all the food and nutrients to them. So that's why if the water velocity in a lake is too fast or too slow, then the mussels will have too much trouble eating their food. This slide is supposed to show the progression of how zebra mussels entered the United States and then spread across the nation. But it's not working right now, so I'll have to add it to the end of the slides. Whether the aquatic invasive species is a mollusk or a plant or any other animal, it has the ability to cause major economic, ecological, and recreational impacts. You've heard me say that the cost to control the aquatic invasive species is extremely high, and eradication is nearly impossible. Invasive species have the ability to harm native sport fish populations. Think about what your lake is known for. Think about the lake that you always go to, with your friends or your family. What if a non-native or invasive species pushed it out? Would your lake be as much fun? Invasive plants can form large dense mats that make boating, fishing, and swimming very difficult. Zebra mussels can encrust piers, lift stations, and boats, which may lead to costly repairs. And there are preliminary indications that some invasive species can cause or can have negative impacts on property values. So I'd like to talk a little bit about control and prevention methods for invasive species. So the slide has a list of control methods that have been used here in Connecticut. Winter drawdowns, if a water body has a dam, sometimes water can be taken out during the winter, and that freezes. If our winters are cold enough, it will freeze the plants and hopefully make them not grow as rapidly, in the springtime. Harvesting, there's weed harvesters that go and kind of like rake up the plants. Herbicide treatments are chemicals that get put on the plants, the chosen plants that they want to try to eradicate, usually invasive. So chemicals get put on, they have to sit for a little bit, and then, ultimately the plants do start to, whether kind of think about if you know anyone that uses a chemical in their yard similar to Roundup, not saying that anyone should use it or not use it, but similar to a Roundup product or vinegar and salt water sometimes can kill plants in your upland. It's a similar situation. You're just trying to kill off the plants. Sediment dredging, exactly what it sounds, scooping out the substrate that has the plants in them. Bottom barriers are big heavy tarps that sit on the substrate to prevent the sunlight from getting down to the plant. So, killing off the plants. At least one lake in Connecticut has tried introducing sterile grass carp into the lake so that the fish will eat all types of plants, the good stuff and the bad stuff, and it has mixed reviews. An aquatic weevil is an insect that gets introduced into the water and does the same thing. It's supposed to eat the plants. I want to run through a couple of existing laws. We have three to four, 2 laws and 1 2 regulations and 2 public acts. And I have a whole slide for that, so let's see if I can't get it going. So we have 2 laws in Connecticut. The first one is Connecticut General Statute, it's a regulation, Connecticut General Statutes 15-180, and that makes it illegal for boaters, to have any sort of vegetation on their trailer when they're moving around. It's vegetation or the listed species there on the slide. And if somebody does get caught with this, law enforcement can issue them a $95 infraction, a ticket. The second statute that we have, the regulation that we have, is 22A-381D. And this isn't really specifically towards the boater. This is more towards pet stores and anybody who is importing, transporting, selling, purchasing, possessing, cultivating, or distributing a specific plant that's on a list. If you did an online search and you looked this regulation up, you would find the list of plants that are not able to import, transport, sell, that whole list. If law enforcement does intercept this, it is a violation of $50 per plant, not the whole violation, just per plant. But this one is a little bit tricky. It does need to be positively identified as one of the plants on that list. We also have an aquatic invasive species stamp, and it was originally designed in Connecticut through Public Act 19-190, which went into effect in 2020, and it has been amended. In 2023, it was amended for Public Act 23-154, which doesn't go into effect until October 1st of 2024. So the invasive species stamp was a fee attached to a vessel registration for anyone that was intending to operate on inland waters. So the money collected, it was a $5 fee. The money collected went into the Connecticut Lakes, Ponds, Rivers Preservation Account, and the money that was collected was used for a grant for municipalities and nonprofits, and they could apply for this money for control, research, and education towards aquatic invasive species. Now, non-residents coming into Connecticut waters, also inland waters, also needed to purchase this stamp through our online sportsman's licensing system. In 2023, the fee, the AIS stamp was modified. So effective October 1, 2024, boaters registering their boats in the fall or non-residents will need to go onto our online sportsman's licensing system to purchase the aquatic invasive species stamp, either an individual one or a vessel one. And they have varying prices. But all that money is still going into the preservation account to be used for the grant. So the Deep Boating Division believes that education is one of the best ways to empower boaters to help prevent the spread of invasive species. And my next slide is going to show a list and some pictures of some of the fun things that we've done. So some of the DEEP's efforts to help prevent the spread and educate boaters is we have brochures, we have flyers, we put information about AIS in our boater's guide, we have information on our websites. We have seasonal employees that work for us usually from May through October or August, depending on if they go back to school. But we have the seasonals called boating education assistants that go to our state boat launches and interact with boaters and talk about clean and safe boating practices. So from this side, it would be conducting voluntary AIS inspections to see if there's any plants or plant fragments or animals or anything on the boats, and educating the boater on how they can help prevent the spread. We have the launch monitor program that I have mentioned a couple times, and we do outreach events for anywhere we're invited. We'll go to talk to at town meetings, at lake association meetings. We also conduct some training for law enforcement officers, so they're aware of, they're updated on the laws and kind of how they can educate the public as well. We have signs at our boat launches, which I have in just the next slide, and we do have a lot on social media. So if you are on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, you can log in and help share and share our message and get it out to more people. So these are some of the signs that you might see at one of our state boat launches, depending on what invasive plants or animals are in that lake. The signs all have the message of clean, drain, dry, which let's dive a little bit deeper into that. So the clean, drain, dry method is what is used not only in Connecticut, but across the United States in an effort to have the same messaging to empower boaters on how they can help prevent the spread of it. So the clean part of it actually kind of coincides with our law that makes it illegal to transport, but that is to inspect and remove any aquatic plant and animal that may be on your trailer. Your hitch, anywhere that's touched the water when you're retrieving your vessel from a boat launch. The next step is drain. Drain all water from the boat and equipment. So if you're fishing, you drain the live wells and anywhere else, big ballast tanks, bilges, anything that may potentially hold water and plant fragments or young veliger zebra mussels. The next step of the clean, drain, dry method is that when the boater is at home or prior to their next launch, they dry their boat for a minimum of one week during hot, dry weather and 4 weeks during cool, wet weather. Now, our boating season isn't that long, especially kind of in the early spring when people are excited to get out there. So drying their boat for 4 weeks just isn't a possibility. So we have the or wash your boat and equipment. These are some of the washing techniques that we encourage people to do if they're not willing to wait for 4 weeks during cool, wet weather. The best way is hot, high pressurized water. Another option is washing with bleach, a bleach solution, or soap and water, right? Get that clean off your boat. Saltwater solution is also possible, as well as using vinegar. And those are the steps for each one of them. These are places that you can check for hitchhikers, for invasive species that are trying to hitch a ride home with you. But really, one of the best things to remember is that if it touched water, it should be checked and then cleaned, drained, and dried prior to your next launch. So that includes the boat, the trailer, your equipment, your dog, your life jackets, the hitch to your towing vessel, the tires of your towing vessel. If it touched water, it needs to be checked. So if you're interested in becoming a volunteer AIS launch monitor, or possibly joining the Deep Boating Division's seasonal boating education assistant staff, this is some information on it. You can use that QR code and it'll take you right to how you can apply for it. And if you have any questions about anything that I've talked about here in the slides, please feel free to reach out. There's my email and my phone number. Thanks so much and good luck.